For the past month, there's been extensive coverage of the escalating Israel-Hamas war. And if you're a parent, you may have found your kids asking you questions, and maybe you don't know exactly how to answer them. Well, that's why we're keeping you in the know today about how to talk to your children about the conflict. And today we're joined by Dr. Paula Ali Smith, a licensed clinical and school psychologist with Carl Behavioral Health in Bloomington. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. So I'm sure there are a lot of parents at home who have been maybe struggling having these conversations with their kids.
Absolutely.
So how should a parent go about having that talk with their kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. Really there's a couple of pieces to it. The first, I think, is for the parent to recognize how this information, these conflicts, or these situations of violence are impacting them personally. It's perfectly natural to have an emotional experience. It's okay to have that in front of our kids. It's actually a chance for them to see what it's like to process those and use healthy coping strategies, but that's not the best time for us to be a teacher to our child. So we want to make sure that we're calm and regulated. That way when we go into the conversation, we can hear what they're asking, pivot and adjust as needed. When we actually go in to have that conversation with our kids, the most critical thing here is to keep it developmentally appropriate.
Right.
We shouldn't assume that the questions that we're having as adults are the same as our kids or even our teenagers.
Right.
Let their questions guide the information that they're looking for. And then when you actually go to answer that information, keep it brief, keep it factual, normalize the emotional reaction that they're experiencing, reassure them of their safety, and then that's a great time to introduce some healthy coping skills.
And are there any maybe topics, words, or phrases that parents should avoid saying in these conversations?
I think that it's more about the extent of information that you're providing, again circling back to the idea of it being developmentally appropriate. We want to avoid severity, things that might be frightening, like information around death and destruction. And again, just keep it critical to kind of what the question that they're asking. This isn't something to avoid, but something to be attuned to is whether there's misinformation or a misunderstanding of what's going on. You're going to want to make sure that you get in there and address that, just to ensure that that doesn't further escalate the emotional reaction that they're having.
Right, that makes sense. And should parents let their kids watch the news coverage or read things online, or, you know, should parents be regulating what their child is consuming about the news?
Yeah, I do think that's important. I think that we should be really intentional about what kind of information our kids are taking in. And I say that because they're taking it in whether it's directly presented to them or not. So we need to think about what kind of TVs are on in common areas of our household, what conversations are happening between adults but within the earshot of our children.
Right.
And then if we find information that we feel like would be helpful for our kids, you want to preview it first, just to make sure that it truly is developmentally appropriate. And then when it's time for your kids to watch, read, however they're taking that in, you want to do it with your child. That way you can pause it, you can monitor how they're taking it in, make sure that you're addressing any of their concerns. That should be a shared experience.
Well, that's great. Those are great tips there. And how can a parent know if their child is negatively impacted by what they're seeing or hearing?
Yeah, I think having an emotional reaction to this information is normal. We're having them as adults, and so your kids are going to have them too. So it wouldn't be unexpected that you're going to see your child possibly be fearful or anxious, angry, sad, any of those confused. Those emotional experiences are all natural. It's the extent of how long they're lasting and how significant the symptoms are. So if it's longer than a couple of weeks, that's when you're going to want to be monitoring if it's really having an impact. So things like changes in their sleep and appetite, whether they're more clingy than normal with you, if they're pulling away from their normal routines. Routines are actually incredibly helpful in this moment. It gives a sense of security to kids to know it's very predictable. But if they're pulling away from those things, that's another flag. In teenagers, it could also look like a lot of poor concentration, some irritability, agitation, or conflict with others. Any of those things, if it seems like there's a significant impact for more than 2 weeks, that's when you want to reach out to a professional. And then if for any reason it seems like they're emotionally overwhelmed and you do hear anything around, thoughts of suicide or self-harm, that's something where you're going to want to reach out immediately for some support, either through a mental health professional, 911, or an emergency room.
Got it. That's some really great insight there. And I'm sure that just helped a lot of parents at home having these tough conversations.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And stick with us. The time is now almost approaching 12:50. We'll be right back.